Hey everybody, this episode is being sponsored by BadderSports. Once we hit 500 subscribers, BadderSports is donating $5,000 to Toys for Tots. Please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to visit the foundation of Toys for Tots and feel free to donate yourselves. We look forward to another great year for Toys for Tots and another great year for BadderSports. Thanks so much for being a fan, and we love being a part of great organizations. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Swing Batter. I'm with Dad, I'm with Todd, and we don't even need to spin the wheel on this one. Dad, you got a ripe fruit for us to pick from the tree of awesome?
I got the complex story of Troy Tulowitzki.
The mile-high mistake.
The baseball team that can't seem to get it done.
Jeez. I mean, this was an adventure. I remember Troy Tulowitzki when he was the last really good shortstop in the old EA Sports baseball game.
And that's where we start our story. That's how we find Troy in EA Sports. And then he goes to the real world, and let's see how he does. What's the story about Troy? What's the backup, Dad? How do we find Troy?
But actually, Troy Tulowitzki was a great baseball player. I mean, let the injuries hurt him, but he's a great player. First 5 seasons with the Rockies, he established himself as the dominant offensive shortstop in the National League. His 4th and 5th season as a shortstop, he hit 27 and 32 home runs. His average had climbed up to .315 in the 5th season. He was a premier defender, recognized as a Gold Glove shortstop. In 2007, he was a big factor in getting the Rockies into the World Series, which they lost to the Red Sox. Everything projected upward movement and a future very bright. In 2008, he signed a 6-year, $31 million contract at the age of 24. Even though he was slowed by injuries, in 2010, limiting him to 122 games, he still hit 27 home runs and batted .315. Because of the level of all-star performance, in 2011, this is where it starts to get ugly. The Rockies extend his contract an additional 6 years for an additional $120 million. The new extension guarantees him $157 million over 10 years. He played 5 years under that contract at the Rockies, but injuries slowed him down. In 2012, he only played 47 games. In every one of those 5 years, Troy Tulowitzki did manage to bat over 300. Injuries slowed him down, and he started to be less effective because he wasn't playing. Now here's the shocking move. The Rockies had a young shortstop that was going to play every day named Trevor Story, so they decided to trade him to the Blue Jays. They traded Tulowitzki, his massive contract, to the Blue Jays because the Blue Jays had a guy with a massive contract that was ineffective, and they convinced the Rockies to take Jose Reyes. We're not talking about Jose Reyes today. But we are going to talk about Troy Tulowitzki. And here's the BadderSports problem. He had 5 years with the Blue Jays. And with the Blue Jays, they ended up paying him $98 million to Troy Tulowitzki. And he didn't show up to the Blue Jays. Todd, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, well, this contract that he signed in this, it's a 10-year, $157 million contract. He had options for buyouts. He had salary, bonuses, the standard stuff that goes on there. He could only be traded once during the contract. So whatever team took him was stuck with him. Like that, I thought that was really interesting because usually they have a no trade clause or something like that. But the Rockies could basically, speaking of Troy, make him a Trojan horse for whatever team they wanted to send him to. To see, isn't this guy so great? Look at how good he is with his high batting average and stuff. and then not telling you that his legs were actually made of glass. Absolute glass. The guy that by the time he was 33, he just fell apart. But I mean, like, even in Canadian dollars, this contract didn't pay off. You know? So, and I think, you know, it finally, it capped in the last season. He signed with the Yankees for a small amount, but he just couldn't play. He couldn't play.
What makes the contract devastating to Toronto is they end up paying this guy $98 million. He only played 3 of the 5 seasons because of injuries. He never batted over, sitting down for this one, 254. In those 3 seasons, he hit a total of 36 home runs. $98 million for hardly any production is what makes this a BadderSports contract.
It's like paying Gordon Ramsay to come make dinner and he comes out with brown bread toast.
It didn't pan well for Toronto. I remember him playing for Denver. I remember the excitement in Colorado for him because he was teamed up with Mr. Arenado, and you had the third base, shortstop, dynamic duo, if you will, the Batman Robin.
Yeah.
They were excellent fielders. They were great hitters, both righty power guys. And they must have known something about him. Obviously, he passed the physical, but his legs just continued to be bothersome. And I could easily argue that him playing in the turf in Toronto didn't help. That probably was one of the problems. Probably should have DH'd him a little more to keep him going. But I know the grass field of Colorado versus the turf field of Toronto is certainly different. Not blaming Toronto and their field for their injuries, but he certainly could not stay playing. He did have a nice little playoff run with Toronto in 2016. However, it fell short when they lost to Cleveland in the championship series. But he did try to deliver, and he did play somewhat respectable when he did play. The problem was his legs just kept giving out. His playoff run in 2016, he got to play the whole playoff run. So he did actually perform in the playoffs. And when they swept the Rangers, he did bat .462, and he was basically leading that team offensively into the championship series, where he then fell apart, which, you know, is pretty, it happens in baseball where a player just can't hit again. He wasn't injured, he was fine, and he was playing in the playoffs, and it gave Toronto a lot of hope. But that hope, like everything else, it just never panned out. His injuries, his leg injuries just kept mounting. And a power hitter with leg injuries, as we all know, doesn't work very well. He didn't gain a lot of weight. It wasn't like he was out of shape. I don't believe it had anything to do with any of those items. It just was the injury bug caught him.
The guy was a 6-time All-Star. I mean, it's not like, you know, you're not talking about somebody that, you know, it's not a situation like you have, you know, with Anthony Rendon where the guy just decides to stop playing. You know, this is a situation where the guy legitimately was gutting it out through injury towards the tail end of his career. And he just, the contract never panned out. You know, they did get, you know, they got some bang for their buck in the early years after, but by the time Colorado traded him to Toronto, you know, it's kind of like Canadian sitcoms. It's just kind of not long-lived, and it's painful to watch.
So he lives out his contract with Toronto. They buy him. I believe they buy him out, tell him to go away. And then he tries it one more time with the good old Yankees. And that didn't last very long at all. And that was where it all ended. So it's a sad ending of a story, of a career of somebody who had a lot of promise. I don't think there's any fans out there that remember him not for being great when he was in Colorado. I remember him very well in Colorado, being an Arizona Diamondback fan and obviously having to play the Colorado Rockies quite often. And when he was in Colorado, knocking home runs with Nolan Arenado, that was a pretty fantastic duo. And when that got split up, I don't think Colorado has really done anything since. But for Troy and for his purposes, it just never panned out for him in his career. I don't think, based on the numbers and his longevity and his injuries, I don't think he's a Hall of Fame candidate at all. I think
I was just going to ask that because I don't think he is, but if he had been healthy, would he have been?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was, I don't think there was a time where he was not an impact player when he played, but his games, look at his games. How many games are we talking about the last 5 years? Those years in Toronto, like, did he even get 100 games in?
I'm looking now, and it's just, he had one season, 2016. He had 131 games.
And that was the one in the playoffs. That was it.
Yeah.
And that was
131. He had 87 in 2015. I think he combined for 128. Had combined for 128 in 2015, and then 131. And then 2017, it's 66 games. And then 5 games in 2019, missed all of 2018. It's tragic, you know? He's obviously, I mean, he didn't, 155 games once, 151 games once. I mean, it's not, you're not winning any durability awards with that. You know? He was
sad. He was fantastic to watch when he was playing in Colorado, that's for certain. So this is why it's a sad BadderSports contract. We're very happy for Troy for getting all that money. I mean, he certainly deserved it. He was playing out of his mind. Colorado went all in, and they were trying to get back to the World Series, as they were able to get 1 year, and they thought they had shored up their infield, and they had these great power hitters to take them to the promised land. And sadly, it just didn't pan out. And this is one of those ones that you just feel bad for the player. Never feel bad for the team, but you feel bad for the player, because I do think if he's healthy, I think he has a Hall of Fame career.
Yep.
I had to put an end to this story in my brain. They traded contracts they didn't like. The Blue Jays dumped Jose Reyes on the Rockies. The Rockies gave the Blue Jays to Tulowitzki, and they ended up paying $98 million. The Blue Jays sent Jose Reyes to the Rockies, and he gave them very little. But I think from what I can tell, that cost the Rockies about $44 million, about half of what Toronto paid. It was a bad deal for both, but still, no matter how we look at it, it was the Blue Jays that win the deal for the worst BadderSports contract in this deal.
Sadly,
all that arbitrage.
Sadly, both of these teams have more BadderSports contracts for you. And for those that follow the Rockies or Toronto, please feel free to leave us some suggestions of some players that certainly scratch you in the wrong place. BadderSports is here for you. Swing Batter likes these contracts quite a lot, and we got a lot more for you. That was Troy Tulowitzki. It's a very sad story. It's very, very sad, especially when you have a player of this talent. I hope Troy is doing very well for himself. He certainly left it all on the field, and for a while, he was the best shortstop in the National League, bar none. That is our story. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Todd. Batter on.